Previously on agentpalmer.com, All Right is more than just an oral history of Dazed and Confused. It's about youth, nostalgia, and the creative process. Punch a Chunk Season 1, how James Turner built a community one Minecraft block at a time. And the teaser trailer for the Edge of the World broadcast Season 2 is out and very tantalizing. This is the Palmer Files, episode 41 with Tina Hamilton, CEO of myHR Partner and the daughter of a Holocaust survivor and Cuban refugee. We discuss the strength she got from her parents' stories of survival, entrepreneurship, religion, faith, community balance, and so much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show. Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 41st episode is Tina Hamilton, CEO of myHR Partner and a very successful entrepreneur. She's the definition of a mover and a shaker. She's bought and sold businesses, but she's earned every bit of her success. How much of it was hers? All of it was hers, but was some of it genetic or maybe cultural? We get into that, and in doing so, we discuss being culturally Jewish, as well as religious. We also discuss the Holocaust, guilt, survival, faith, hope, and generally cover a ton of ground. Tina's story is one of perseverance, so sit back and enjoy the ride. Before we get going, remember that if you want to discuss the episode as you listen or afterwards, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer and the show at The Palmer Files. You can find Tina's business on the web at myhrpartnerinc.com. That's myhrpartnerinc.com for more information on what she has created and what they do. Don't forget, you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com. And of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get into it. Tina, I have seen a lot of about pages, and everybody comes at them from more or less the same perspective, but yours, when I came across it, mentioned that as an interesting fact, you are the daughter of a Holocaust survivor and of a Cuban refugee, which doesn't seem like an interesting fact. That seems like star-crossed lovers. A little bit. But it made me think, like, we are definitely products of our parents. I don't think that there's much, the nature-nurture argument aside, but ever since I read that, I just keep thinking, like, would I ever include my own parents in my own about page? And I, as much as I am very much my father's son, to my mother's dismay, I don't know if I would. So I guess, what was that like? Because that's not, you grew up in a house with living history, basically.
Yeah, well, let's see. So I never thought about it from your perspective, that I wouldn't include my parents in my biography. However, yeah, I do have a unique situation with them. And I suppose I look at it in that perspective, I look at it as part of my identity.
Yeah.
My father and my mother, they both lived very unique lives, obviously, and early on, for sure. And so it affected everything. You know, everything was different in the way I grew up, and the music that was playing in my house, the languages that were being spoken, you know, all of it, stories being told, for sure.
Well, I joked with you when we first spoke, and I've been thinking about it, like the guilt in your house. Like, could you ever get away with anything? Like, was there ever?
Let me tell you, the worst, and I hate to start off saying this about my now deceased father, but the worst part in a funny way, I guess, if you can call it funny, of growing up with the father that was in the Holocaust for 5 years, is when you say, "Dad, I'm hungry," and he says, "Hungry? You don't know what hungry is." And then you wait for him to go into his rant. And as a teenager, you're like, "This isn't the Holocaust anymore. I just want a sandwich." So, yeah, guilt was definitely, and both my parents being Jewish, yeah, there was just a lot of guilt laid on us. That's for sure.
My mother, I don't know what the right way. My mother, I was immune to my mother's guilt. My grandmother's guilt, no, but my mother's guilt never really hit me. And she always felt shortchanged by that.
Well, why do you think?
I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know. It's so weird to think about it. Because you grow up Jewish and guilt is just there. I feel
like it's in the Bible, in the Jewish Bible. Thou shalt make their kids feel guilty.
Yeah, I'm not saying she didn't make me feel guilty, but it never worked to the way she wanted it to. She could, okay. You should maybe do the dishes. Yeah, maybe I should, but I won't. But the other thing, and this is the part that is astounding to me, is that your parents lived through history, whereas I am so far removed from that. That when you're learning about this stuff in actual school, and you go home and you're doing homework about World War II, that's got to be like, well, let me tell you how it really was.
Yeah, I have to say, when I was in school and that subject would come up, it was almost like I was required in my soul to share, what that was like. Now, our neighborhood was Jewish, and so my father certainly wasn't the only Holocaust survivor in our area. I grew up in Philadelphia, Northeast Philadelphia, and back in the 60s and 70s, that was how people congregated. They lived in neighborhoods of like-minded religions, race, everything. I mean, the streets at Christmas time, the streets were dark. And there was one particular street, Arnold Street, that, we grew up in row homes, and there was one particular street where as soon as you cross the alley, all the lights were there. And that's where all the Christians lived. So that was, and there was one. So imagine that you're living in, they were really row homes. They were like twins, right? Okay. So twins. And then in between, there's an alley where people just drive through or get to their parking spots in front of their house and the garage. So here's this alley. And if I looked out my window, which was on the third floor of the house, I saw the Dohertys. So the Dohertys were the only Gentiles that lived in our neighborhood. And Irish, of course, Doherty. And the stereotype was ridiculous. Of course, I didn't appreciate it at that time because I was a young girl, but the husband was a drunk. So I didn't even know what a drunk was. Jewish people aren't known to be big drinkers.
Right? No, definitely not.
No, and certainly not in those days. And so I would hear him come home and I'd hear yelling, and she would lock him out because he would just get mean, I think, because I'd hear him banging on the door and I'd watch in terror. I honestly thought that was how all Gentiles lived. And that was because that was the only exposure I had. That was it.
Did you? So I want to talk about Jewish for a second. Did you? Right. What kind? I mean, I'm a I was brought up conservative until about 10, and then we moved, and I became a Reform Jew, and that's where I was bar mitzvahed. So I've been Jewish light for most of my life.
Well, it's kind of somewhat a similar situation. I don't know what you would have called us. We weren't Orthodox, so I guess we were probably conservative. we, growing up, I went to Hebrew school 3 nights a week from first grade on. Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, I would come home from school, have a snack, do some homework, and about 4 o'clock, I think Hebrew school started and ended at 6 or 7. I think it was 3 hours. Yeah, 7. And then we'd walk home at night in the dark, completely different time in Philadelphia, in the city. But and then we would walk to synagogue on Saturdays. And that all went on for most of our life. However, before any of us were bat mitzvahed, my mother became ill. She had, I guess back then you would call it a nervous breakdown, but she was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Okay.
And it was a different world then. So my father pulled us out of Hebrew school. Everything was hush hush. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody about what was going on in our house. And it was just literally the rug was pulled out from under us. So suddenly we weren't going to Hebrew school. We weren't going to synagogue. And nothing was explained to us. It was just, this is what's happening. And that was the end. And so it was many years before I even approached the idea of Judaism again. Like it was just shut out of my life. So yeah.
Because I feel like I lapsed myself from it. Like it's always been there, but being a practicing Jew has come and gone in my life. When you came back to it, was it familiar at all?
It's still familiar, but I have to say, I never really did much. I think about often, and even lately, honestly, it's kind of strange that we're having this conversation because even lately, I've been thinking about, I wonder if I should really, really revisit it. And maybe I'll find something there that is missing from my life. But I haven't rejoined a synagogue or anything like that. My kids both went to Jewish camps and did some things like that, but no Hebrew school. My son identified as Jewish. My daughter, she'll say she's Jewish, but she's completely really has very little knowledge of what being Jewish even is. Where my son, they're 17 years apart, so my son was a little more aware.
Okay.
Of that.
I mean, I'm definitely a cultural Jew. I've definitely picked up all of those things.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
But I've also been the only Jew most of my life.
The only Jew of your friends, you mean? Or?
Of my friends, or, I went to high school in rural Pennsylvania, like rural Northeast Pennsylvania. So I was in Wayne County in Honesdale High School as the only, I was one of 2 Jewish families until another moved in. So there were 2 siblings 3 or 4 years ahead of me in high school. So I was only I was only there with them for a little bit. Obviously, they were gone and graduated by the time I got there. And then at some point one year, another family moved in, and there was another Jew in my class. Otherwise, it was, hey, that's the Jew. Let's ask him what's up, right? And so it's kind of always been that way. So I've kept up my own cultural / religious education by answering everybody else's questions. So I have general knowledge, right? Maybe it's ingrained from Hebrew school. Maybe it's from when I went to the Jewish summer camp. I have no idea where it comes from. But what's Purim? All right, well, it's the story of Esther. And, and I can Cliff Notes that stuff, but it doesn't have... Without the ritual, I find myself kind of falling away from it a bit. I'm not building anything in my backyard. I'm not dressing up for Purim, right? Sometimes I light the candles for Hanukkah. Sometimes I don't. So it really comes and goes. It's odd. But I'm kind of like you, where I'm like, maybe. I have all the books. I don't know. I have all the books. I have prayer books. I have the Torah. I have all of it. At least 2 shelves worth of just texts. And I always think maybe this is going to be the year I'm going to reread it for myself and discover something. I don't know what's keeping me from that. I know there's something more. I feel like everybody of faith has that like hope. And it seems to always be related to faith, and I always feel jealous about it because I come and go with my religion, and I've never had like the faith, or I've never felt like I've had it. So I've always been on the periphery, like maybe this is the year.
Did you? I know maybe that's a common thing because it sounds like you and I are the same in that way. Do you or your family still go to synagogue or belong to one at all?
No. There's the old joke, right? That there's there's a Jew stranded on a desert island, and when they come to rescue him, he's like, oh, people are like, why are there two temples here? And he's like, oh, this is the one I go to, and this is the one I don't, right? Like that's, and I know that when my parents moved back to where they are now, they remained a part of the congregation where they were because they enjoyed the rabbi.
Oh.
But that rabbi then retired, and they've kind of been congregationless ever since. Now, they could have joined some around where they are, but there were some a rabbi on his way out, a rabbi on his way in, and so it's just it I don't know, it never ended up being like a super priority for them.
Right.
And it's not that that's trickled down to me, but I just feel like even when I was a part of congregations or a part of stuff, I always felt it was personal. Or, the community aspect was something completely different. But when it came to faith, it was always going to be personal for me. So I have to do that on my own. I don't know. Again, I don't know what's going to take that push. And I sincerely hope that sometime in the next year, 2 or 3 or whatever, like I can get myself to at least reread that stuff without like a death in the family. Like because we've all heard those stories like, oh, so-and-so died, or I lost my friend, or I lost a job, or this, that, and the other thing. And I had a breakdown, and then I found religion. I don't want that to be the case. You don't want to You don't want to be forced into it. So I do want to make it of my own volition. I just don't. The timing's not right. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I wonder if it's common. And religion overall, it seems like people are moving away from it. There's less faith. I mean, the Catholic Church, of course, had such a big shakeup with the priests and. That was, terrible, a sin. And I don't know, it seems like people don't have time for it. The one nice thing that I remember about it is feeling like I was part of a community. And I think that in itself, right, is something. But everybody wants to belong to something.
But I think it's been replaced by the online communities. Because, I mean, when you boil it down, right, the Jewish communities, the communities that sprout up around churches or mosques, that's self. Those are kind of like Facebook groups where like you hear what you believe. You already believe that stuff. That's why you're going to said synagogue or said church. So you hear it's more of a reflection chamber, right? And I feel like now that we can get those things online. We don't need them elsewhere. Although, let's be fair, Facebook groups are devoid of the faith that you get from those other groups, which would be very helpful to have. I think now more than ever, that might be why we're circling back to it, right? Like it's like, well, there was hope.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you're talking about Facebook because the other day, I try and hold myself back from commenting on things sometimes on Facebook because, it's just, people are out of control and the way that they write and comment, etc. But there was a story, and I think CBS or somebody ran it on Facebook, about a 95-year-old Nazi guard, 95, that 70 years ago, he was a guard at the camps. He had an opportunity to say, hey, I can't, this isn't for me. And he would be placed somewhere else doing whatever it is that their military people did. in those days. And he didn't. And not only that, he stayed and he was part of the torture, part of the whatever, part of the horror of the Holocaust. And they didn't mention if his family knew. So there's no way to know that. But he had an entire family and wife and children and grandchildren and whatever. He's old. And he was discovered. Not only was he discovered, but he had still been receiving, up until that moment, a couple weeks ago, a pension check from his position in the Holocaust. An actual pension check from Germany. So how he was never caught until this moment, I don't know. But he got deported. And people were commenting, let the guy go. He's 95 years old. He was a kid. He was forced, blah, blah. And I feel very different, about that. So my father was in for 5 years. His entire family was murdered by the time he was 12. And then he spent 5 years in, 10 different camps. It's really hard for me to sympathize with I don't care how old they are. It's hard for me to sympathize with someone that still was collecting a check, knowing what that check was. My father was offered, they actually, believe it or not, I don't know if you know this or not, but believe it or not, Germany wanted to make retribution to the people that survived the Holocaust, and he was offered 2 payments. One was a Social Security check for working in the Holocaust, working.
Sure. And
the other was a pension. And he refused. He said, there's no way I'm taking that money. That is blood money, the blood of my parents. And no. Well, he retired and he was doing okay. I mean, he wasn't in a bad shape, but he rethought it and thought, you know what? Whatever. I probably should take that money. Why not? If anything, I leave it for my kids and, why should Germany keep my money?
Yeah.
So he changed his mind about it, which makes sense. And he started getting these checks and back payment. And he was calling me and telling me, oh, I got a check today for $3,000, another for $5,000, another for whatever. I don't know why, just randomly, until he had something like $50,000 in back payments. And then he would get a regular 2 checks. One was quarterly and one was monthly. And he got that until the end, and until he passed, and then that, that ended. So, I guess, you got to give something to Germany for doing that. At least it's the best they can do, right? What are they going to do? You can't bring back the dead. But this guy, this soldier was receiving checks for what he did, what he actually did to the Jews.
Yeah.
And that is completely unacceptable. And so I wrote a quick little story about my father and said, look, I'm not suggesting forgiveness or not forgiveness, but I have zero sympathy for a guy that continued to get a check for the work he did. Because now that at some point in his life, if he really felt like, wow, what I did was horrible, and he had sorrow for what he did, then he should have stopped getting those checks or deposited them in some sort of a fund, nonprofit, whatever. And he did not do that. So people were arguing with me. And I've never in my life, they weren't being jerks about it, well, pretty much. But people were arguing. They said, no, he has a family. I said, my dad had a family.
Yeah.
My dad had a family. And he never had them his entire life, his 12 on, because of men like him. And no, he had an option to get out and he didn't. So I never had something go viral that I posted, but I would say it went viral. I had 1,400 and some odd comments.
I'd call that viral. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty viral, or checks, whatever, likes or whatever. A few people said to me, did you notice that some of the people put the little laughing emoji? And I said, I don't even know what to say about that. Like that. I'm not going to approach it. Like, that's just, we live in a sick world, so in some cases. But I've never felt more Jewish than I have over this last administration, when the Nazi, the skinheads, or whatever you call them, anti-Semitics,
yep,
have risen. There's no question But people that aren't Jewish don't pay as much attention to it. Like, I've heard people say, oh, there's not that much of it around. No, they are literally measuring the amount of growth they feel or they felt represented.
Yes. Yeah.
In the White House.
It's maybe there's a weird like sixth sense to anti-Semitism that we have, because you're right. It doesn't matter how many articles there are about this, that, or the other thing. You feel it. Like you just feel it. It may not like be in the air. It might be over in another state, but you definitely feel it as like, well, there's something going on here, and I'm not really, it doesn't feel right. And, it's just weird to think that I thought we were making so much progress.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Well, I mean, right after, and I'm not necessarily blaming Donald Trump, but right after he went into office, that first week, I think it was, swastikas were showing up all over Philadelphia. I mean, all over. And that's, if that's not a sign, I don't know what is. And then it continued. There were marches all of a sudden where there weren't. There's always been anti-Semitics. It's never going to go away. But
did you?
But yeah.
Did your father have the conversation about being different? Because I've so in with the racial injustices that are happening and that have happened over the last year and a half, 2 years, the conversation has been that certain minorities have to sit down their kids and have these conversations like, you're different. If a cop pulls you over, this is what you have to do, right? And I feel like at some point, I remember, not necessarily to that level, but I remember being told, you're different, and that's okay. And I don't remember who said it. I know it was in relation to my religion, and I know that was it. But did you? Because I remember in like Sunday school, other people asking why everybody hates us. I don't know why I never asked that question. But was it ever something that like your father talked about? Because it was different for him, I would presume.
Yeah. No, as a matter of fact, we grew up in such a Jewish neighborhood. Like I said, we walked to synagogue on Saturdays along with all the other neighbors. We walked home from Hebrew school for 3 nights a week, et cetera, et cetera. Celebrated every holiday. It wasn't, for me, there was we grew up thinking we were the majority. I had no sense that I wasn't until in Philadelphia, you take city buses. There aren't school buses, or at least not in the part of Philadelphia I lived in. Northeast. When I started middle school, 7th grade was middle school, and we took a city bus, went to school, and that was the first time I was surrounded by, non-Jewish people. I mean, there were Jewish people there, but there was more non-Jewish people. And that was when I learned. Nobody ever told us that we were different. So that was shocking to me. Like it was a reality check. So, yeah. Did you feel different? Did anybody say that?
I was always in the minority. So like it was like I just presumed like
you knew.
Well, there's not that many of us. So or you know what? Honestly, I spent 4 months studying abroad in Israel as part of one of the Reformed Jewish movement
oh, wow.
semesters abroad in high school. And that was the first time that I was even remotely close to, outside of like summer camp for a month. That was the first time where I was, Judaism was part of daily life. And that again, I know there's people that are like, well, that's because you were in Jerusalem. No, it's really not. It's because it was a Jewish program and they made sure you didn't forget it. On the weekends, I did what secular Israelis did, not what Jews did, right? Like there's this difference. But outside of that, I've always felt like outnumbered, I guess, in a way. And I don't know if I feel like that's given me some strength to move along and undertake things on my own, I guess. But for you, like how do you get that? That's a clear, like, before and after. There's, well, I feel like I'm in the majority, and then, oh my God, I'm not. Like, was it an easy learning? What was the learning curve when you finally get there?
It was, I mean, again, for me, it was definitely in junior high, which is that time in life where you're exploring who you are to begin with.
Yes.
You know, you're going through all that teenage angst and, you know, all of that. And it's hard to remember, but I do recall just like it kind of rocked my world that we weren't the majority, and that, you know, because I really just always thought that. And so, yeah. And then, you know, it never stopped amazing me. I remember when I moved to the Lehigh Valley, let me think a minute. It was 1990. So it was a long time ago. And was that the year the Gulf War, 90, 91?
Yeah, 89, give or take. It was
yeah. Yeah, I just remember I was in my apartment. I moved into my apartment with my son at the time. It was just him and I. And I remember finally getting cable. It took 2 weeks to get cable in those days. And I remember, like, thank God, because I had no friends. I didn't know anybody. It was winter. It was like January. And finally we got cable, and like the Gulf War, like that night, you know, the Gulf War started, and we were like terrified. And anyway, so I'm living here and I'm now single, and I go on a date with somebody. I wasn't really super interested, but I figured, well, let me just start getting out and, you know, whatever. And I remember going out with this guy, and we went out a few times, and he came over to pick me up, and he was waiting for me, and he saw my menorah, still left over from the holidays. And he looked at me when I came out, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, that's a menorah. You know, it's what Jewish people use." He said, yeah, I know. He goes, "But you're Jewish?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, are you really Jewish?" I remember thinking, what the hell kind of question is that? I mean, I fake being Jewish because I don't know why I would do that, because there's really no benefits of faking it. So, but I will never forget that, because he was completely authentic about that. So I don't know what to say about that. Wow. It was very strange.
So I want to let's move along for a moment. You are a successful entrepreneur, and I would guess some of the strength of everything we've already talked about that's been passed down has helped you in some regard.
No question.
But it's more than strength. Like, did you know? I like to ask this question. Did you know what you wanted to be, like, when you grew up?
Well, I had a different kind of upbringing. So, you know, I mentioned to you earlier that my mother became schizophrenic when I was 10 years old. And so, you know, all of a sudden we were pulled out of everything, and everything was hush hush. My father had a little corner store in Albany section of Philadelphia. So he wasn't home till 8 o'clock every night, 6 nights a week. So we were kind of left with this mother that was like really completely off her rocker. He didn't put her anywhere. He just kept her at home. And we went crazy, you know. So by the time, right before I turned 16, when I was 15 years old, I said, I'm done with this. And I moved out. Like, it's a long story, but I moved out of my house. So for me, living on my own that early in life, it changed like the normal perspectives of what people do in their teenage years, thinking about what you want to do or what college you would go to, or et cetera. It was more of, where am I going to get food? How am I going to survive? You know, that kind of thing. So no. I mean, when I was a young girl, I had all the normal, you know, I want to be a teacher or whatever, but no, I didn't have that. Did you?
Yeah. Yes and no. I knew I wanted to work, although I had no concept of what that actually meant. And I at some point I wanted to be like an aerospace engineer, but I wasn't good enough at math, so that wasn't going to happen. And then I was going to be a rock star, and I'm all right with an instrument, but I'm not that good. And I kind of just floated on a path. It's not necessarily the survival of like moving out that young that you had, but at a certain point it's just like, all right, where's my next paycheck coming from? And then I ended up in retail and just was like, well, I guess I'll start my own business on the side. And that's kind of where I started programming websites, and a lot of my digital marketing stuff has kind of come across from there, but it's all been like happenstance, right? Like I didn't plan to be where I am. I just ended up here, on that level. So, you know, I think my path is now I want to help people, but I don't know what that means. And I don't know how to put food on my table while doing it, which is a whole different thing.
I mean, it seems to me like you'd be great at doing podcasts. You seem to like it. You're good at it. Your voice sounds good. You like to ask questions. Either that or, maybe you could be a backup for Ellen DeGeneres when she's, got days off. What do you think?
I don't know about television. I will tell.
Yeah, right.
If there was money in podcasting, I think maybe I would have found it by now, but I don't know. I think that's just as much of a crapshoot as anything else. But I want to ask, not to really deflect, but like you are, like a founding partner for a company. Where in your path do you go from like survival to, well, I'm going to start a thing? I mean, obviously it's not the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not a partner. It's just my business. But, well, I'll tell you, I do give credit to my father for my upbringing because, well, obviously, the man is a survivor. So I'm going to deflect a little too. So not only was he in the Holocaust for 5 years, survived, lived in refugee camps for 2 years after that, came to America, was drafted to the front lines of the war, survived that. He was shooting, killing, whatever, and helping other Americans deal with death because it was common for him. And then he had several little businesses. He owned a laundromat, he owned a corner deli. And in all of those, he's been robbed, shot at, stabbed. I mean, just the guy never could catch a break. And then, of course, my mom getting sick and him having to deal with that while running his business. So somehow his survival skills became ingrained in me. My sister and my brother are different. They live different lives than me. But he was an entrepreneur. I mean, that's all there is to it. And we all worked at my dad's store here and there, like in the summers, but I worked there much more regularly than my sister did. And I think that somewhere deep down inside, I knew. And eventually, it's a long story, but the short story is eventually I worked for somebody and an owner of a business here in the Lehigh Valley. And he was in Chicago and he had all kinds of businesses. So he put me in charge of his business, opened a bank account in my name and the company name, but with my name, and said, here, run this, and left. And then he would check in with me every once in a while. And his absence really took a toll on the business. So I asked him if I could buy him out. And he let me. He even helped fund me to do it. And that was my first company. So, but it was a franchise. So after I ran that for 4 years, it was going very well. I mean, it was successful. Then there was a merger. The corporation had a merger, and I had an option to either sell back or buy out my competitor that was local. And long story short, the competitor that was local wasn't somebody that I wanted to buy out. So his ethics and different things weren't the same as mine. So I sold, and I was very early 30s, and I already sold my first company. So I later came up with the idea for this business that I have now. That was 19 years ago. And I think ultimately, and I've read this before, that entrepreneurship is almost in some ways hereditary. I found out my mother's father had all kinds of little businesses while she was growing up. I found some pictures, and that's how I found out. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known. So I come from, generations of entrepreneurs. But I think when you're independent, control is very important. It becomes important because it's survival. It's not necessarily like controlling other people or that kind of thing. It's more of a survival, for me anyway, it was more of survival. So it never dawned on me to be nervous about starting a business, considering I had a lack of education, a lack of most of the things that people would have in starting a business, I didn't have. But it just was, I'm starting this business and it's going to do well. Like that, it wasn't like I ever thought, will it do well, won't it do well, question myself, because I didn't have the luxury of even considering that because I was on my own. So yeah. And now here we are 19 years later, we're in 34 states. I have 31 employees and growing this year. We expect significant growth. And so it's part of, I feel like my DNA.
It is. So I don't know if the question to ask is it fearlessness or confidence? Because I mean, survival is part of it, right? But right. There's, I started a business and I had no idea what I was doing. And I still run it as a side gig. That's where, hey, can you help me out? Yes, I can. Just build my business. It's fine. And it's not unsuccessful, but I can't make a living with it. But I didn't know what I was getting into. I still think I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing, but I never had a confidence level that was like, this is what I'm going to do. Or the fear kept me as like, well, I need something else. I don't know what kept me back, but something did. But for you, was it confidence or was it fearlessness? I guess I mean, those are the two things as you're going through the progression that come to mind.
That is an excellent question. I don't know if I ever defined it or named it, but I think that once in a blue moon, I think about it and think, oh my God, why wasn't I scared to death? Why wasn't I like, I hope I can eat tomorrow kind of thing? But I think I got kind of lucky. I came to the Lehigh Valley to run a business for somebody and eventually realized him being an absentee owner wasn't really serving the company. And so I offered to buy him out. And it was great because I bought a franchise. And I sometimes say to people, it was like being married a couple of times. This was like my first marriage, but my first business. And because you have a franchise, you're buying into an idea. You're buying that's already been decided. You're buying into, they look ahead for what needs to be done, what needs to be next, what's the cheapest way to get business cards, all of it. You got a legal department, everything. You still have to have your own finance and deal with your own numbers and things like that and sales for sure. But you have all these things to lean on. And I believe that because I didn't have the education and things behind me, and I'm still like this. I soaked up everything I could. I couldn't get enough information. I'm still like that today. I cannot get enough training, enough anything, when it comes to being a business owner. I'm going to Miami next week for a week to get some training and something that's important to me and my business. And so I watched other business owners and I had to, I had to learn. I failed in some things, I wasn't very good with finances at first, et cetera. So I guess it was in my head, there was no option. So maybe you could call it fearlessness. That feels a little too, I don't know. I don't know that I connect completely to that word, but I think that you probably on the outside looking in, that would be what it would be called. Because for me, there was no option. Okay. It would be like you crossing the street and a semi truck coming at you. You would do whatever you had to do to avoid getting hit by that semi truck, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's that is, except for the fear part of it, that was exactly how I felt. It wasn't like an option. I was just going to figure it out. Even in 2007, 2008, with this business I have now, my HR partner, we got hit really hard during that downturn in the economy and all that. And even then, I had a lot of debt and I didn't know what was coming. We got hit first. We were like first in line. And anyway, it still never dawned on me to fail, that I would possibly fail. And I think that having that, I think a lot of entrepreneurs probably have that to a certain extent. Maybe it's stupidity.
Well,
maybe I feel more like almost like I'm naive, but I'm not naive. I don't know. And here I am now. Listen, I'm a 9th grade dropout. I moved out of my house when I was 15, and I have a multi-million-dollar business that is supporting me and will support me and probably well into the future for my family forever. And so, well, I don't know forever, but for a long time. And I did that because I never focused on money, ever. I only focused on success.
Okay. I mean, I like that. I want to go back to something you said.
Okay.
Do you read? Like, is the education? Look, I understand that there's an education in watching other people, but are you also reading? Are you, did you like take courses? Like, where's the where's the ongoing education?
Well, right now, and for the last 3-4 years, I think, I'm in a group called EO, which is Entrepreneur Organization. And now I was already doing pretty well to join that group, but it's an international organization with about 14,000 members, and it's truly international. And part of belonging to that, there's a lot of benefits to it, but one of the things is the constant education. And they have all kinds of classes. I'm in a 3-year program. It's once a year for a week over at, I'm blanking out. What is the name of that school? It's one of the Ivy League schools, but they have partnerships with like Harvard University and Yale and all these, Ivy League schools. And they give these classes a particular subject. So it's not about a degree, because once you're an entrepreneur, I mean, yeah, it's always good to have a degree, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
When you're an entrepreneur, you just need the information. So yeah, for me, I've always been more of a visual learner, like going into a classroom interactive than I have reading. But earlier on, I used to read every book imaginable. As I've gotten older, my attention span isn't as good. So I'm better off going to live classes. And of course, now this year, it's nothing but webinars, with COVID. So yeah, I just soak it up. And if I meet somebody that's, more successful than me, I really try, when I'm in a room full of successful people, I try to get next to the people that I think I can learn something from.
Do you have any spare time? Like, this sounds like a very busy existence. Like, do you get downtime?
For many years, I really didn't. My whole life was about my business and my kids. And, but I mean, I have a lot of friends. I have a very big social circle. Part of that was because of my networking. I was very good at networking. That's one thing I can say about myself. I don't compliment myself too much, but when it came to networking, I built a very nice network for myself. And no, I really didn't have a lot. Now I have much more spare time, although it doesn't feel like it as much. But here I am. I'm in, I live alone and with my cats, and I'm a cat lady. And I was going crazy during COVID like everybody else. I mean, I wasn't alone, but I lived alone. I was working from home. We're all remote. And I decided that I couldn't take it anymore. And so I came to West Palm Beach for 4 months. And here, living in this little condo where there isn't much I have to do, I have a lot more time on my hands than I ever have in my life. And I have decided that at 56 years old, that this is the way I want to live. So I decided to rent out my house and really focus on myself for a while, and try and give myself more time, because I built this company. It's successful. It's on its way to becoming much more successful. And so I can start to relax a little. So that's new.
I like that because I feel like
Yeah.
it's so it comes up quite a bit when I talk to professionals and entrepreneurs alike, the work-life balance, which
Oh, yeah.
everybody picks on millennials for, what their wants and needs were going into the workforce, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah.
I'm a shoulder generation, so I'm technically a millennial, but I've got Gen X values, and I look at my parents and I look at the friends I have that are older and that were in the workforce ahead of me, and there was no such thing as a balance. You worked, and that's what you did, and you were defined by your work. And maybe as either an elder millennial or a young Gen Xer, whichever you choose to put me in, choosing a hobby like this, like podcasting, and before it blogging, where it was, I'm going to do this for me, despite whatever my professional career ends up or was at the time, it's like, this is with me, and I'm starting to see other people ahead of me in career, not just necessarily in age, take a step back and go, well, this isn't all bad. Like, I don't have to work 120 hours a week. I can just enjoy, I can have a balance. I can find a balance. And what I think the biggest myth going is that if you stop working at 5, automatically your life is balanced. No. Like, I'm a huge proponent of, you need constructive hobbies. You should do something. If you come home at 5 and just watch TV and go right back to work, that's not a balanced life. And I like that people are taking time for themselves now. It makes me feel like we're going to end up as a better community of people, because all work and no play, right? Like, that's it's the butt of jokes for a reason. But I'm excited for you. This is like a new chapter.
It really is. Thank you. That's very sweet. It really feels that way for me. It feels like I pinch myself because I can't, and I wonder if this is common with entrepreneurs, this imposter syndrome. I imagine it is, or there won't be a name for it.
No, imposter syndrome exists everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I definitely have suffered from that emotionally in a big way. But for the first time ever, I'm starting to feel it a little. I'm allowing myself to feel like, look what you've done. Like, but it still doesn't feel real, because most of my life, especially when I first moved out, I remember being 17, 18, 19. I had no idea. I got pregnant young then, and I had my son, and I remember waiting for him to finish his chicken legs that I could afford the meat for the week, and hoping that he wouldn't eat them all so I could have something. And I was very, very, very poor for a very long time. And now here I am. It doesn't even make sense to me.
Do you wish for the balance aspect, for the taking time for yourself? Do you go, I should have done this sooner?
It doesn't enter my mind.
Okay.
Because I had to do what I had to do.
Yeah.
It was like a journey that had to be given. I never thought I'd be here. Like, the fact that I'm even here is a miracle. And when I say here, I don't mean West Palm Beach. I mean, just, at a point where I live my life completely debt free. I have since 2000. After 2008, when I ran up a lot of debt because of the downfall of the economy. After that, after I survived it and made up for it, took a long time. I promised myself I would never have debt. My house is paid off. My cars are paid. Everything. I have zero debt, and so I live. I put away plenty of money, and these are great lessons for people. Living debt free is such an important way to live if you possibly can. When you're young, it's hard. If you buy a house and things, of course, you're going to have a mortgage. But other than that, it's really important if you can to try to live your life that way, because it frees you up. You can't move forward when you have debt, because if you want to do something or start going on vacations or, enjoy your life, or even progress, like go to school or do things to help you get further in life, it all takes money. Sadly, everything takes money. So when you have debt and a debt payment, that's the problem with debt. If you have a payment that's due, it could keep you from being able to afford other things that you want. And so I didn't learn that early in life. I learned that later in life through, the issues that I went through. And now it's just very freeing. So I don't know if I answered your question. Once again, I forgot what you asked.
No, you did. Absolutely. No,
okay.
It makes sense. And I'm, I this has come up a few times. Like I've been unemployed for over a year.
Yeah, it's a long time.
It's a long time, but at the same time, my nest egg is still safe. I still have a savings to live off of. This is the whole
Wonderful.
reason that you save for a rainy day.
Absolutely.
I do feel like that's a bit of a Jewish thing, because like, I would say part of it's being frugal, but the other part is no, you save for the rainy day. I have plenty of friends that just, if they could make, if putting $10 away or spending the $10 because they paid everything else, they needed to for the month, they're going to go out and spend the $10. And I stayed in and put the $10 away. And
good for you.
Now I'm spending all that money because I'm not making any, but still, like, I have this nest egg for that reason, right? And I'm with you. Like, my goal is debt free, because I don't want to have to think about, like, there's a level of stress people don't associate with purchases that it's just there, but it's so common to them. And I would love to be able to be like, yes, my TV broke. I don't have to work. Like, I'll just buy a new one. Not, well, I don't have the money, or what am I going to not do in order to replace this TV? Or whatever. The TV's an example, a computer, a car, whatever. Like, I would just like to be able to be free of that. And that's huge. Like, the stress probably melts away the moment you don't, like, that's not a thought process anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah.
And, I don't know. I guess I still am always going to worry. I never feel like there's enough money, enough. What does it mean enough? What is enough? I don't need to live like a king or a queen, I guess in my case. But I don't know. I feel like that's always going to be part of me. And it is ingrained in me. My dad was always pretty tight, like you said, maybe a Jewish thing. Well, certainly he had reason to be that way. But he was always very tight with cash.
I don't know. I think there's a part of that, which is why you were successful in business as well.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, he really influenced me in so many ways, and so many good ways. And I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack from this conversation, but I'll start with sobering information from the American Jewish Committee. More than 76 years after the Holocaust, anti-Semitism is again on the rise. According to the latest FBI hate crime statistics report, American Jews, comprising less than 2% of the American population, were the victims of 60.2% of anti-religious hate crimes in 2019. Part of the problem is a willful ignorance around just what anti-Semitism means. By definition, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. That's the direct definition from the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Anti-Semitism doesn't mean living through the same level of hatred that Tina's father survived. A lack of genocide doesn't make it any less relevant. There is a real living history that connects us to each other, both as survivors and their descendants. Which brings us back to the podcast and the question of faith, and it's a question that sticks with me. I am a cultural Jew, but I'm not very religious. In a world filled with echo chambers, maybe faith is what we need to seek out. Tina and I both have a shared elapsed religious faith, but I believe that we both have faith in ourselves and our own abilities, and that's also unique these days, depending on who you ask. Perhaps because Tina has reached the top and I'm not sure what or where the top is, that our differences in our faith in ourselves are most glaring, but it's part of our ongoing journey. You've heard the cliche that the journey is more important than the destination, but in order to have faith in the journey, you probably need a destination. Tina's not at the end, but she has arrived where she wants to be. I'm still wandering through a personal desert, wondering where to go. Despite my faith in myself, I still have to pick a destination to begin the journey. Second, it can't be understated that in the end, we are our parents' children. Whether it's blood relation or nature versus nurture, the gifts we receive from those who help us along the way, no matter our age, are often indistinguishable from what we cultivate of our own volition. That doesn't make either any less important. So take what you can from those who are willing to help and pick a direction. If you already have a direction, let those around you in to help, even if it's just to take your mind off things for a while. Nothing is perfect, but with a little faith, we can all get to where we belong. Isn't that the goal anyway? Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 41. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can tweet me at Agent Palmer, this show at the Palmer Files, and you can find Tina's business on the web at myhrpartnerinc.com for more information on what she has created and what they do. That's myhrpartnerinc.com. Don't forget, you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com, and of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. All right, Tina, do you have one final question for me?
I think my question to you is, we've talked a lot about what it is to be Jewish. What's your thought on what you feel makes being Jewish part of your identity? Like, what is it? How would you describe it if somebody asked, like, what's it like to be Jewish? Or what does it feel like to be Jewish, especially since you're not as practicing like you once were?
So part of it is cultural, 100%. And I don't know how you defined that. And that the cultural part, I feel like, is easy for people to understand, because everybody's got their own culture. Right. And that's regardless of how mixed it may be, depending on the family or how, ingrained it is or just off to the side. Everybody knows culture, especially when from their family. The religious part is a mix. So part of it's faith, and it wavers on me. But the other part is, maybe it's from Hebrew school, maybe it's from my time at Israel, maybe it's from my bar mitzvah. I don't know, but there are inherently Jewish values that got passed down that seem to be more more than culture, more than just cultural values. So the value of knowledge, the value of education, the value of asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask why. These are things that aren't just culturally Jewish. They're at the foundation of Jewishness. We are encouraged from the very beginnings. And it's the one thing through all of the different, Sunday school teachers I've had, the different rabbis I've had, the different teachers, especially in Israel that I've had. Everybody says, ask why. And I don't know. I don't know how much of it is religious, as in terms of, throughout the entire Old Testament, we are constantly being tested and asking why. We are not afraid to question God. That's part of it. But the other part is the historical, cultural aspect of the Holocaust happened. Why us? The bondage in Egypt. Why us? It's in the Old Testament, but it's also in, anti-Semitism's up. Why us? Right? It can even be like, well, we're good at telling jokes. Why us? Right? Like it doesn't matter what it is, but that question of why seems fundamentally Jewish. And I feel like I wield it like I'm supposed to, which is whenever you have the question, whenever why pops into your head, ask it. I feel like that's inherently Jewish on a level that I see my friends that will ask, like we would be in class together and I would ask why, and they wouldn't. Well, why didn't you just ask? Like, I'm asking it now. Like, why not? And I feel like that is, to me, Judaism. Although, I had a shot. I entertained for a moment becoming a rabbi, but I couldn't get Hebrew.
Really?
I couldn't get Hebrew down, so that was never going to happen. Well, the idea of writing speeches appealed to me. The concept of the sermon, I was all on board with. But that's all I wanted to do. Like I'm all right counseling people, and I'm all right with the sermon part. But it's the Hebrew part that I had a problem. Also, I'm not that good of a singer. And at least in the Reform movement, that's a big thing. So
Right. So you can't be a cantor either.
No. I mean, I could get up there and play guitar for the cantor.
Okay.
But not.
All right.
No, nobody's going to be asking me to sing at New Year's anytime soon.